Why did no one notice her name was missing from the roster? The briefing room felt heavy, as if the air itself carried the weight of unspoken orders. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, washing everything in a pale, sterile glow. The men leaned over maps and digital displays, voices layered one over another, their words colliding in hurried bursts of certainty and bravado. They sounded alive, urgent, sure of themselves. She sat at the far end of the long metal table, posture straight but eyes lowered, her notebook open, pen unmoving. Her silence wasn't born of shyness. It was habit, survival. She wasn't on the list, not officially, and she knew it. The mission folder at the center of the table bore its stamped name in thick black letters, Operation Iron Dusk, clean, sharp, forgettable. A name meant to strip reality of blood and sweat, to turn lives into tasks. She wasn't supposed to be part of it. A pilot had been reassigned at the last second, leaving a gap no one wanted to admit. She had filled the chair quietly. No challenge, no acknowledgement, no correction. Forgotten in paperwork but present in flesh. Invisible, yet sitting right there. One soldier recounted a past raid as if it were a campfire tale, laughter bursting at all the wrong moments. Another made jokes about terrain, about how locals wouldn't know what hit them. The captain's voice cut across the chatter, sharp, clipped, echoing with the authority of someone who needed to be heard more than understood. She listened. She always listened. She absorbed every detail, storing them where others had let pride erase the gaps. Not once did anyone ask for her name. She told herself it didn't matter, that invisibility was an advantage. She had learned this long ago. When people underestimated you, you saw more, heard more. You became the shadow they forgot to watch, the silence that remembered every detail. Still, there was a sting, a faint echo of another time, another silence. Her father's medals still sat in a box at her mother's house, tucked away like old photographs nobody wanted to frame. Once his name had been spoken with respect. Once his sacrifice had been held high. And then slowly, year by year, his name shrank in records, in memory, in honor. He was reduced to a line in history no one read anymore. Forgotten. She had sworn, quietly, painfully, that she would not let that happen again, not to him, not to herself. But here she was. Another ghost in a room full of men who couldn't even see her. Rain began to fall outside, a soft percussion against the corrugated tin roof of the outpost. She could hear it even through the closed walls. A metallic rhythm, steady, patient. Rain meant mud. Mud meant weight, slower movement, lower visibility. Every soldier here should have been factoring it in, but the laughter swallowed details, the captain's bark drowned nuance. She wrote it down anyway. Small truths tucked into the corner of her notes. Her pen scratched quietly as she recorded what others discarded. Weather, distance, patrol times, possible delays. No one would ask for these details later, but they would matter. They always did. She caught sight of Ramirez, the youngest in the room, barely 20. His shoulders hunched forward, fingers fidgeting against the fabric of his pants, his knee bouncing beneath the table like a hidden drumbeat. Fear radiated off him, not loud like the bragging voices around him, but quiet, almost ashamed. He glanced at her once, briefly. His eyes were wide, uncertain. She held the look for half a second, steady, calm. He broke it, embarrassed, turning away quickly. But she knew that look. She had worn it once. Fear not of dying, but of failing, of being the weak link in a chain already stretched thin. The briefing ended with the captain's voice cutting through the noise like a hammer. Wheels up in 30. Get moving. Boots scraped. Chairs clattered. The room emptied in a rush of adrenaline and half-formed confidence. She sat still a moment longer, letting the others storm past her. Then she stood, her movements precise, measured. The corridor leading to the lockers was dim, lit by one flickering bulb. Her boots echoed against concrete, steady steps, steady breath. She opened her locker, checked every strap, every buckle, every round, not once but twice. She pulled her rifle free, inspecting the chamber with practiced care, precision, ritual, control. That's what this was. She had learned the hard way. When the world ignored you, the only way to survive was to build a smaller world where every detail bent to your will, one screw at a time, one magazine at a time. Her gloves smelled faintly of oil. Her pack felt heavier than usual, but she carried it without complaint. She always carried more than her share. Invisible hands took invisible burdens. No one noticed. No one thanked her. That was fine. She didn't need thanks. On the tarmac, the helicopter roared like an animal straining against chains. Blades tore the rain into mist, throwing droplets against her face. The others loaded quickly, joking, yelling to be heard over the engine. Her name wasn't called. No seat was marked for her. She stepped inside anyway. Took the last seat, strapped in, eyes down. No one objected. Maybe they didn't notice. Maybe they didn't care. She closed her eyes as the rotors thundered, drowning the voices, the orders, the world itself. In that mechanical storm, she heard something else. Her father's voice. A memory. The night before his last mission, when she had asked if he was afraid. He had smiled, tired, sad, but steady. Courage isn't about being remembered. It's about carrying what others can't. She opened her eyes again. The storm outside gathered, dark clouds swallowing the horizon. The helicopter shuddered as it lifted. Boots shifted, hands gripped rifles tighter. Some of the men cheered. She stayed silent. Her pen was gone now. Her notes closed, but her memory held every detail. And in that silence she promised herself something. She would carry them, no matter what, even if they never spoke her name. The flight stretched into a restless blur of noise and silence. She watched the rain streak the windows, silver lines cutting through the night. She watched Ramirez fumble with his gear, his fingers trembling. She didn't say anything. Not yet. But she filed it away, ready to act when the time came. The captain barked something over the headset, his voice half lost in static. The men responded with shouts, with forced bravado. The helicopter tilted, dipping toward shadowed terrain. The mission had begun. And she knew deep in her chest, where silence lived, that this wasn't going to be simple. Something was wrong. Something none of them were paying attention to. But she had. And when the time came, when fire tore through steel and voices broke into screams, they would remember. Not the briefing, not the orders, not the roster. They would remember the one they had forgotten. What did she notice that no one else seemed to see? The helicopter dipped lower, its rotors thundering above valleys where mist clung like shrouds. Rain streaked sideways, pelting the windows until the world outside blurred into a gray canvas. The men inside shifted, checked their weapons, adjusted straps, tried to mask the tension with jokes that landed flat. She sat quiet in her corner, helmet pressed against the vibrating wall, eyes narrowing as the terrain came into view. Something in her chest told her this wasn't right. She leaned forward just enough to glance through the side window. The valley was darker than it should have been. No glimmers of life, no signs of movement, too still. Ramirez leaned across, whispering nervously to the soldier beside him. "Why's it so empty down there?" His voice cracked under the roar of the rotors. The man didn't answer, only tightened his grip on his rifle. She wanted to say it aloud, to voice what her instincts screamed, but her name wasn't on the roster and ghosts didn't speak unless asked. So she swallowed the thought, clutched it like a hidden weapon. The captain's voice filled the cabin, cutting through the static of headsets. "We land, we move fast. No delays. Objective Alpha in 30 minutes. Eyes up, mouth shut." His words were confident, too confident. She had seen that look before, in officers who mistook noise for clarity, who hid fear behind command. She wondered if anyone else heard the quiver buried in his orders. She doubted it. The helicopter's skids slammed against the earth. A spray of mud streaked the sides. The men jumped out quickly, boots sinking into the soaked ground. The rain hit harder here, unrelenting, drumming against helmets and shoulders. She slid out last, pack heavy on her back, rifle close. The valley floor smelled of wet earth and iron. The air was cold enough to sting her throat with each breath. Around her, the others fanned out, rifles raised, scanning shadows they didn't believe could hide anything. She scanned too, but not for enemies. Not yet. She scanned for what didn't belong, for the details silence always carried. Ramirez stumbled slightly in the mud. She caught his arm instinctively, steadying him before he could fall. He muttered a quick, embarrassed thanks and avoided her eyes. She didn't reply, only nodded once. They moved, fast as ordered. The captain pushed them harder, his voice crackling through the comms. "Keep pace, don't lag, Alpha's just over the ridge." Her boots sank deeper with each step, mud sucking at her heels, rain slashing sideways across her visor. She breathed slowly, rhythmically, the way she always did under weight. She had carried heavier. Burdens others couldn't. Burdens no one remembered. By the time they crested the ridge, the valley stretched silent behind them, swallowed by fog. Ahead, scattered structures emerged from the mist, skeletal frames of abandoned buildings. Windows shattered, roofs caved. It looked like a ghost town, emptied long before they arrived. One soldier whistled low. "Alpha's supposed to be occupied." "Shut it," the captain snapped. "We move in." But the unease spread like smoke. They were trained to recognize traps, yet the captain's urgency shoved that training into the background. She saw it, the doubt on faces, the shifting of feet, the way hands tightened on rifles. Inside one of the crumbling structures, the air was thicker, heavy with the scent of rot and mold. Floors creaked under boots. Flashlights cut through dust, beams revealing broken furniture, walls scarred with burn marks. Ramirez whispered, almost to himself, "Nobody's been here in years." But someone had, she knew it. The small details screamed it. Fresh mud tracked along a corner, a nail recently hammered in a doorframe, the faintest curl of smoke lingering in the rafters. She saw it. The captain didn't. Or maybe he chose not to. "Clear," one soldier called. "Clear," echoed another. Her silence disagreed. They regrouped in the largest room, the men loosening slightly, some removing helmets to shake off water. Ramirez wiped rain from his face, looking paler than before. A tall soldier named Harker lit a cigarette, the ember glowing faintly in the dark. "If Alpha's empty," he muttered, "what the hell are we here for?" The captain turned sharply, jaw tight. "Intel says weapons cache. We find it, we move. Orders stand." "Orders," Harker muttered under his breath. "Always orders." She caught it. The bitterness, the weariness in his tone. Not rebellion, just exhaustion. She recognized it because she carried the same weight. The kind that pressed deeper with each mission, each night spent waiting for dawn that never seemed to come. Her own exhaustion rose in waves, but she pushed it down. She thought of her father again, of his words about carrying what others couldn't. She thought of her mother, who had begged her not to enlist, who had cried when she shipped out. She thought of the silence of that house when she came home on leave, how it echoed with absence, not presence. Her eyes drifted to Ramirez again. His hands shook as he reloaded a magazine he hadn't fired. A child in a uniform too heavy for him. She wanted to tell him it was okay. That fear meant he was human. That courage wasn't about not being afraid, it was about moving anyway. But the words stayed lodged in her throat. No one asked her to speak. The storm outside raged harder, wind slamming against broken windows, rain seeping through cracks. The building groaned as if it carried secrets. She felt them pressing in. Then it came, faint at first, almost hidden in the storm. A sound not born of weather, a metallic click, a whisper of movement. Her pulse spiked. She turned sharply, eyes scanning shadows, rifle raising instinctively. But the captain barked, "Stand down, nothing there." She froze, not because she believed him, but because she saw the others relax. Obedience over instinct, noise over silence. And for the first time, fear for herself clawed at her throat. Because if she was the only one listening, then when the fire came, she would be the only one ready. Her breath slowed, her grip tightened, her mind raced. They hadn't seen it, they hadn't heard it, but she had. Something was waiting for them. And she knew when it arrived, when the valley erupted into chaos, her silence would end. Because they might not remember her name, but they would remember the one who carried them. What broke the silence first? The storm outside or the storm waiting within? The room had grown too still, too heavy. The rain lashed harder against the broken glass, wind screaming through cracks in the walls, but beneath it there was something else. A pause in the rhythm of the world, a space where sound should have been but wasn't. She felt it in her chest like a second heartbeat, fast, unrelenting. Her rifle rose almost without thought, barrel angled toward the corner where shadow pooled deepest. She didn't breathe, didn't blink. She waited. Then the world split open. The first blast ripped through the far wall, a thunderclap of fire and steel. The shockwave hurled dust and splinters into the air, choking light and sound in a single breath. Men shouted, stumbled, scrambled for cover. Ramirez fell flat, his helmet clattering against the floor. Harker's cigarette tumbled from his mouth, ember dying as his rifle swung up too late. She moved before the captain barked his first order. Her body slammed against Ramirez, dragging him behind a half-collapsed wall as bullets tore through the air like angry hornets. Sparks sprayed from metal beams, shards of stone splitting against the ground. The storm outside screamed louder, merging with the storm inside. Contact, contact. Voices roared over the comms, overlapping, panicked. The captain shouted orders: left flank, suppress fire, hold position. But the building was already bleeding apart, every order swallowed by chaos. She pressed her shoulder against Ramirez's, her rifle braced against the crumbling wall. His eyes were wide, wild, breath coming in shallow gasps. She grabbed his chin, forced his gaze to hers. "Breathe," she whispered, just loud enough for him. "Now." He did, somehow he did. She peeked over the wall. Shapes moved in the mist outside, dark forms slipping between shadows, rifles flashing. Their positions weren't random, they had known the squad was coming. This was no abandoned valley. This was a cage. She fired once, twice. Each shot precise, deliberate, not wasted. A figure dropped. Another stumbled, rifle falling from his hands. She ducked back, chamber smoking, heartbeat steady despite the storm clawing at her senses. "Return fire, push forward," the captain roared. His voice cracked, more desperate than commanding now. The men obeyed, bursts of fire shredding through windows, cutting blind into the mist. The enemy answered louder, harder, each volley driving the squad deeper into panic. She knew this rhythm. She had studied it, felt it before. Ambushes weren't just about bullets. They were about fear, about pressure. The enemy pushed and pushed until obedience cracked into chaos, and when chaos bloomed, bodies fell. Ramirez trembled beside her, trying to reload, his hands fumbling with the magazine. She covered him, firing another precise burst before guiding his shaking fingers into place. "Slow," she told him firmly. "Slow, or you'll drop it." He nodded, swallowing hard, grounding himself in her voice. Across the room, Harker cursed, blood streaking his arm from a grazing wound. Another soldier dragged him behind a toppled beam. Their eyes met briefly, hers and Harker's, and she saw it. Recognition. He had noticed her silence before, dismissed it. Now he looked at her with something different. Not yet respect, but awareness. The captain's voice cracked again. "We hold here, we hold." Hold, she thought. In a collapsing building, surrounded, outnumbered. Holding wasn't survival. Holding was waiting to be buried. She made a choice then, quiet, unannounced. She slid along the wall, pulling Ramirez with her, weaving through shadows toward a broken side door. Bullets tore overhead, plaster raining down, but she moved with precision, each step calculated. No wasted motion, no panic. Ramirez whispered, "Where are we?" "Alive," she cut him off. They slipped through the door into the storm outside. The rain drenched instantly, plastering uniforms to skin, mud sucking at boots. The valley stretched wide, enemy fire tracing arcs through the mist. She crouched low, scanning quickly. There, a ridge to the east, jagged rocks rising like broken teeth. High ground. Cover. The only chance to turn chaos into survival. She grabbed Ramirez's arm, pointed, his face paled. "That far?" "Yes." He hesitated, fear pressing heavy against him. She didn't wait. She moved, and he followed because fear of being left behind was heavier than fear of running. They sprinted through mud, rain stinging like needles, bullets cracking the air around them. Each step felt like defiance, each breath like borrowed time. But she didn't stop. She didn't look back. She carried him forward, carried his fear with her, carried the silence of every soldier who hadn't seen this coming. They reached the rocks, breathless, drenched, alive. She shoved Ramirez into cover, then pressed her back against stone, scanning through scope. From here she could see it all. The building crumbling under fire, the enemy moving with precision. The squad trapped, pinned, voices breaking over comms. And she knew with cold certainty that if she didn't act now, they would all die. Her finger tightened on the trigger. One shot, then another, each one deliberate, each one shifting the rhythm, cracking the pressure the enemy had built. She aimed not to kill blindly but to disrupt, to cut commanders, to sever lines of movement, to turn the storm against itself. Through the scope she saw Harker glance toward her position, realization dawning. His shout carried faintly over the storm, "Cover fire, follow it." The squad moved, shakily at first, then with growing strength, guided by the rhythm she set. The captain barked again, but his words no longer shaped the fight. The silence had. Beside her, Ramirez fired too, steadier now, his fear tempered by proximity to her calm. His rounds weren't perfect, but they were enough. Enough to keep him alive. Enough to matter. Minutes stretched like hours. The storm raged. The valley burned with fire and thunder. And when the last echo faded, when silence finally returned, it was different. Heavier. Bodies lay scattered in the mist. Enemy movement stilled. The building still stood, though scarred, walls pocked with holes, windows shattered. The squad was alive, shaken, wounded, but alive. She lowered her rifle slowly, rain dripping from the barrel, breath fogging in the cold. Her hands trembled now, not from fear, but from the weight of what she carried. Ramirez leaned against the rock, chest heaving, eyes wide. He looked at her differently now, not like she was invisible, not like she didn't belong. He saw her. The comms crackled, the captain's voice strained. Regroup, regroup at Alpha now. She didn't move immediately. She stayed behind the scope, scanning, watching, trusting silence more than orders. Only when she was certain the storm had truly passed did she stand, pulling Ramirez to his feet. They walked back slowly, mud clinging, rain relentless. When they stepped into the wreckage of the building, all eyes turned. Harker's arm was wrapped in a makeshift bandage, blood seeping through, but he nodded at her. Small. Acknowledgement. The captain avoided her eyes. He gave orders again, trying to patch authority over cracks that had split wide. But she knew. They all knew. The one they hadn't named, the one forgotten in the roster, she had carried them through fire. And though no one spoke it yet, something had shifted. They would remember. Why did the room fall into silence when her name surfaced, as if spoken from the ashes of a fire no one wanted to remember? The dossier lay open on the table, her face in grainy black and white, her name scribbled low in a roster that should have been cleared months ago. The others stared, avoiding eye contact, but one of them finally muttered, "She shouldn't even be alive." And yet she was. The memory of smoke still clung to her, phantom heat that wrapped around her lungs at night. She never corrected them, never told them how close it had been, how she had carried men twice her size through collapsing walls, how her back still bore the weight in scars no one could see. To them, she was a soldier who survived a fire. To her, she was the ghost who walked away from it. Outside, the base was alive with mechanical rhythms, the clatter of boots, the shriek of engines spooling up, the metallic clank of a supply door closing. She breathed it all in as if trying to anchor herself to a world that moved too fast, too recklessly. Her squad was preparing for the next operation, but she moved among them like a shadow, touching rifles, checking straps, speaking in measured tones no one dared challenge. Still, the silence lingered. She noticed how the younger ones looked at her, half in awe, half in fear. There was a story written into her presence, but none of them dared to read it aloud. And she let them wonder, because sometimes silence was the only way to keep breathing. The briefing came quick, dropped on them like a stone into water. A village cut off, smoke rising in the hills, civilians trapped under the boots of an enemy who had learned to move like phantoms themselves. The orders were direct: insert, secure, extract, clean, precise, on paper anyway. She stood at the back of the room as the commander pointed to red circles on the map. The men shifted uneasily in their seats, but she saw it in their eyes: hesitation. They had heard whispers of the hills, how entire patrols vanished in those woods, leaving only silence behind. No one asked her to speak, but she did. The river's the choke point. They'll have spotters on the ridge, and if they're smart, they'll light the lower paths before we get close. The room turned to her, a soldier speaking out of turn, forgotten in the roster, now cutting into the plan. The commander didn't silence her. He watched her instead, eyes narrowing, weighing. "What do you suggest?" Her voice didn't waver. "Split. 2 fire teams in staggered movement. Take the ridge at nightfall. Keep the river in our ears. If they're hiding in the dark, make them listen to us instead." There was a pause, then a nod, and just like that her words reshaped the mission. Still, when the meeting ended, she walked out alone. No congratulations, no pat on the back, only the faint murmur of boots shuffling behind her. That night as they moved out, the sky was a deep iron gray, clouds pressing low as if the earth itself wanted to suffocate what came next. The woods were thick, branches scraping helmets, roots catching boots. Every step was deliberate, measured, silence stretched thin as a wire. She led the second team, rifle close, breath steady. Each sound carved into her memory: the whistle of wind through hollow trees, the crunch of damp earth, the distant call of something wild. But beneath it all was the faint hiss of water. The river, just as she expected. They pushed higher, climbing the ridge, and she thought she saw movement in the corner of her vision. A flicker, a shadow sliding against the dark. Her hand rose, signaling halt. The men froze behind her, eyes wide. And then silence, nothing but the hiss of the river below. She felt her chest tighten. Was it a trick of her mind? The fire had taught her how quickly shadows could become flame, how quickly silence could become screams. But this wasn't fire. This was patience, someone waiting. She crouched, whispering barely above a breath, "They're here." One of the younger soldiers shifted, fear in his eyes. "Where?" Her reply was a whisper of certainty: "Everywhere." The first shot came not from them, but from the dark. A sharp crack that split the night, a round snapping bark from a tree inches from her head. Instinct took over. She pushed the younger soldier down, rolling behind cover, eyes scanning. "Contact!" voices shouted. Chaos erupted. Muzzles flashed in the night, illuminating faces caught between fear and fury. The ridge exploded in sound, fire lighting the branches. But through the storm she stayed steady, heart pounding, lungs tight, but movements precise. Every breath became a calculation, every shot a choice. And then she saw him, a figure slipping between trees, rifle angled down, not firing but watching. A spotter. She knew the type, the one who marked targets so others could finish the job. Her rifle rose, the world slowed, finger steady, breath held, a silent exhale, one shot. The spotter fell, and with him the rhythm of the fight shifted. The enemy faltered, losing eyes in the dark. Her team pressed forward, driving them back, pushing them off the ridge. When the silence finally returned, it wasn't the peace they hoped for. It was the heavy quiet of aftermath. Smoke, sweat, the scent of damp earth torn by fire. She lowered her rifle, chest heaving, hands steady despite the pounding in her head. Around her, the younger soldiers looked at her differently now. Not as a ghost, not as a rumor, but as the anchor that had kept them alive. Still, she said nothing, just moved among them, checking wounds, adjusting gear, steadying shoulders. Because in her silence she carried something none of them could name, A fire that never left, a memory that still burned. Later, when they regrouped by the river's edge, the commander asked quietly, "How did you know they'd be waiting?" Her gaze stayed on the water, dark and restless under the moonlight. "Because I would have waited there." He studied her, searching for the edges of a soldier no one truly understood. But she didn't offer more. She couldn't. Some truths were better left in silence. And as the river hissed around them, carrying smoke and ash downstream, she felt the weight of a question she couldn't escape. How many more fires would she have to walk through before they finally believed she belonged? What did it mean when someone looked at her, not as a comrade, not as a survivor, but as if she were already halfway gone? She saw it in their eyes that night around the fire, the men and women sitting close, rifles propped against knees, smoke curling into the dark sky. They whispered low, laughter breaking in short bursts, trying to keep fear at bay. And yet when their eyes landed on her, the air shifted. They didn't say it out loud, but she could hear it anyway. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not after the fire. Not after carrying bodies out of a building collapsing into itself. She had slipped through death's hands, and in their minds, that made her different. She pulled her jacket tighter, staring at the flames. Her hands were steady, her posture unbent, but inside there was a tremor. Not fear of what lay ahead, but of being forgotten again. To be erased not by death, but by silence. The commander's voice cut through the night. "We move at first light. Enemy regrouping in the valley. Intelligence says they've set up makeshift bunkers near the school. If it's true," his jaw tightened, "there'll be civilians inside." A quiet fell over the circle. No one needed to ask what that meant. Bunkers meant shields. Shields meant children, women, elders, all used as cover. Her throat tightened, memory colliding with present. The fire. The children she had carried, coughing, their faces streaked with soot. The weight of one boy, no older than 7, whose hand never let go of her sleeve until they were outside, and then never moved again. She looked at the ground, hearing only the crackle of wood. One of the younger soldiers, Ramirez, broke the silence. "What if they don't let us through?" The commander gave the answer they all feared. "Then we go through them." Her jaw locked, her chest burned, and she said nothing, because if she spoke, if she let that memory out, it would consume her. Morning came cold and pale, fog hanging low in the valley. Their boots sank into damp soil as they moved, rifles raised, eyes sharp. Every sound was magnified, the rustle of branches, the crunch of gravel, the distant crow of some bird that hadn't yet learned fear. She walked near the front, eyes scanning the horizon. The school came into view, a squat concrete building scarred by shrapnel, windows broken, walls pockmarked with bullet holes. A flag, ragged and torn, hung from a crooked pole. Her stomach clenched, not because of the building, but because of the silence around it. No children's voices, no sound of life, only the weight of something waiting. They crouched low, eyes fixed. Movement flickered near the doorway. Armed men, rifles in hand, scanning the tree line. And then she saw it, small figures pressed against the wall inside, their faces pale, eyes wide. Civilians, trapped. Her breath caught. The commander whispered into the radio, "Positions, hold, wait for my mark." But she felt the seconds bleeding. Every heartbeat was a countdown. And in that moment she knew, waiting meant death. Waiting meant fire swallowing them whole like before. She turned her head slightly. Ramirez was beside her, his rifle trembling in his hands. His lips were moving silently, maybe a prayer, maybe a curse. His fear reminded her of herself, younger, still trying to believe courage was louder than dread. She whispered almost to herself, "Not this time." And before anyone could stop her, she moved. It wasn't recklessness, it was clarity. The kind that came when memory cut through hesitation like a blade. She slipped low through the grass, rifle hugged to her chest, eyes locked on the figures guarding the door. Every step was measured, every breath counted. Behind her she knew the others were watching, maybe cursing, maybe praying, but no one followed, not yet. A sharp whistle cut the air, the signal. Enemy eyes snapped toward her position. Bullets tore through the grass, the air hissing with death. She rolled, pressed against the dirt, and fired. One shot, clean, precise. A guard crumpled at the doorway. Chaos broke. Her team surged forward, no choice but to follow. Gunfire cracked through the valley, the school's walls echoing with the storm. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. Her body remembered what her mind could never forget: the fire, the children, the weight of loss. She pushed through it all, her voice low and steady as she shouted commands, covering angles, pulling Morales forward when his fear froze him. They breached the doorway. Smoke, dust, the sharp sting of cordite filled her lungs. Civilians huddled in the corner, eyes wide, hands covering ears. A woman clutched a baby close, whispering prayers in a language none of them understood. She lowered her rifle, kneeling, her voice softer than the chaos outside. "It's all right. We're here. We're getting you out." Their eyes met hers, fear, disbelief, and then trust. The extraction was brutal. The enemy fought with desperation, knowing the shields they had hidden behind were slipping from their grasp. Bullets rained, grenades shook the ground, smoke choked the air. But she carried them, one after another, guiding, shielding, lifting a boy whose legs wouldn't move, carrying him across the yard as rounds snapped the dirt at her feet. Morales covered her, firing wild, shouting words he didn't even hear. The commander's voice roared through the radio, "Move, move now." And they did, dragging civilians through the tree line, shielding them with their own bodies, refusing to let the valley become another grave. Her chest burned, her arms shook, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Every child she touched was the boy she lost in the fire. Every woman's scream was the echo of the ones she couldn't save. And with every step, the weight pressed harder, but so did her resolve. When they finally reached the extraction point, when the civilians were loaded into waiting vehicles, her legs nearly gave out. She leaned against a tree, sweat soaking her uniform, rifle heavy in her hands. Morales stumbled beside her, chest heaving, eyes wide. He looked at her not with fear, not with awe, but with something else: respect. "You didn't wait," he said, voice hoarse. She shook her head, breath ragged. "Waiting kills." The vehicles rolled out, carrying civilians away, their faces pressed to the glass, staring back at the soldiers who had pulled them through fire. She caught the gaze of one girl, small, frail, no older than the boy she'd lost years ago. Their eyes locked. A moment. Silent. And in that moment she felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief, not forgiveness, but something close. The commander approached, his face unreadable. He studied her for a long time before speaking. That wasn't protocol. Her voice was steady. Protocol doesn't carry them out. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging something words couldn't hold. As the sun dipped low, painting the valley in shades of fire and ash, she stood there, silent, the weight of memory still pressing but no longer suffocating. Because for once, she wasn't forgotten in the roster. She was the reason they were remembered at all. Why was the room colder when she walked in, though the heater hummed low in the corner? The air itself seemed to shift, conversation dying in half-formed words, eyes cutting to the floor. They had returned from the valley hours ago, yet the base felt like a trial ground. The civilians were safe, the mission complete, but protocol had been bent, rules stretched until they almost snapped. And she was the one who had done it. The commander stood near the far wall, hands behind his back, expression carved from stone. Around the table sat officers, analysts, men who judged with papers rather than bullets. She remained standing, arms loose at her sides, chin steady though her heart pounded a muted rhythm in her chest. One officer cleared his throat. "You endangered the mission, broke silence before command gave the mark. If your gamble had failed, we would be counting bodies, not blessings." Her lips pressed tight, the words she wanted to say burning at the back of her tongue. That waiting had killed more than any bullet ever did. That hesitation was a grave no one wanted to name, but she stayed silent. The commander's eyes stayed on her, heavy and searching. He knew. He had seen it. The choice that carried more weight than any order scribbled on a page. Finally he spoke, voice low but certain. She carried them out, all of them, and none of you were there to see it. The silence that followed was thicker than smoke. No one challenged him. No one dared, but she could feel it, the unease that clung to her like ash. They didn't know whether to call her reckless or savior, and maybe she thought it didn't matter. Outside, the night wrapped around the base like a shroud. She found herself walking the perimeter, boots crunching gravel, rifle slung but mind restless. The stars above were sharp, endless, and she hated them for their distance. Morales found her leaning against the fence, eyes on nothing. His steps were hesitant, almost careful, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "You always this quiet?" he asked, trying for lightness. Her head tilted, but she didn't smile. "Silence keeps me alive." He nodded, chewing on his lip. "Back there in the school, you didn't even think, you just moved." Her eyes dropped to the dirt. "I thought," she paused, breath catching, "I thought of what happens when you don't." He didn't ask more, didn't need to. His silence was enough. But when he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reverent. "You're the reason they're still breathing. Don't let them take that away." For a moment she let herself meet his gaze, and there in his eyes she didn't see fear. She saw belief. Days blurred into nights. The mission had ended, but the war hadn't. New orders loomed, new valleys marked in red. Yet whispers of her choice lingered like ghosts through the halls. She caught fragments when she passed, the younger soldiers speaking softer, the older ones shaking their heads. Some called her reckless. Others called her the only reason they had come back whole. It wore on her, though she never said so. Each word was a shadow on her shoulders, pressing down, heavy as the packs she carried into the field. But she had learned to live with weight. What unsettled her more was the distance from command. The commander who had once nodded quietly in respect now kept his silence longer, eyes sharper. He hadn't punished her, hadn't stripped her rank, but something unspoken hung between them. And in the quiet of her bunk at night, when the base was still, she wondered if her place here was unraveling thread by thread. The next operation came without warning. An ambush in the hills, another squad pinned, radioing desperation through static. Her unit was dispatched for support. No time for debate. No time for plans drawn neat in ink. They moved under the weight of urgency, rifles clutched, eyes hard. The hills were steep, jagged, the kind that cut lungs with every breath. Smoke rose in the distance, gunfire cracking like bones breaking. Her legs carried her faster than the others, memories clawing at her ribs. She remembered fire. She remembered screams muffled in smoke. And she could not, arrive too late again. The pinned squad was dug into shallow cover, rounds tearing soil inches from their heads. Panic showed in every movement, every frantic glance. They were seconds away from collapse. Without waiting, she dropped low, sliding beside one soldier whose hands shook too much to reload. She took his rifle, slammed a fresh magazine in and pressed it back into his trembling grip. "Breathe. Look at me. You're not dead yet." Her voice was steel wrapped in calm, and for a moment his eyes steadied. Then she rose, scanning the ridge. Shadows darted, muzzle flashes sparking. She fired, each shot precise, carving silence into chaos. Her team surged behind her, no orders given, only instinct. They followed her momentum, drawn into her orbit. The enemy broke, scattered, their ambush unraveling under the weight of sudden resistance. And just like that, the pinned squad could breathe again. Afterward, as the smoke cleared and the wounded were carried back, one of the rescued soldiers clutched her arm, eyes wide, tears cutting lines through dirt on his cheeks. "You came," his voice cracked, heavy with disbelief. I thought we were done." She swallowed hard, throat tight. Not while I'm still breathing." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and they clung to her as she walked away. A vow she hadn't meant to speak, yet one that burned true. That night back at base, Morales sat across from her, staring like he was trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't name. "You don't sleep, do you?" he asked finally. Her silence was answer enough. He leaned forward, voice low. "Whatever it is you're carrying, it's more than orders, more than missions." She closed her eyes, breath slow, and in the dark she almost told him about the fire, about the boy's hand that never let go, about the way she still woke tasting smoke, hearing voices she couldn't save. But the words stuck, and instead she said softly, "Some things are better carried alone." Morales shook his head. "No one carries forever." She didn't answer, because deep down she wasn't sure if he was right. The commander called her in the next morning. His office was dim, blinds drawn, the air heavy with tension. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You saved them again." Her voice was even. "That's the job." His eyes narrowed. "No, that's more than the job. You move before anyone else. You break silence. You act like the rules don't hold you." Her chest tightened. "Because rules don't bleed, people do." The words hung between them, sharp, undeniable. For the first time his expression cracked, not anger but something else. Weariness, understanding, and maybe fear. He leaned back, exhaling. "One day that weight you carry will crush you. I just hope it doesn't crush the rest of us with it." She stood in silence, then nodded once. No defiance, no apology, just the quiet acknowledgement of a truth too heavy to escape. And as she left his office, her mind echoed with the question that had haunted her since the fire. How much longer could she carry everyone through flames before she finally burned out herself? Why did the younger ones keep drifting closer to her in the mess hall, their trays clattering nervously as if her shadow alone could steady them? She noticed it in small ways first. Morales sitting across from her more often than not, two privates trailing just behind her when she left for training, a soft nod from soldiers who once avoided her gaze. They didn't say it out loud, but she felt it. Something in her silence had become an anchor. Yet anchors weighed heavy, and she feared what would happen when they sank. The base buzzed with rumors of another offensive, enemy forces gathering deep in the valley systems. Command tightened their grip, drills lengthened, briefings grew harsher. The air itself felt wound like wire, and still, when the whispers spread, it was her name on their lips. "Ask her," they muttered when plans seemed uncertain. "She knows." It unsettled her more than she admitted, because she wasn't a leader, not in the way they wanted her to be. She was just a soldier carrying ghosts through fire. At dawn, during weapons checks, Morales lingered by her side, his voice low. "They're watching you, you know." Her eyes flicked to him, then back to the rifle she was cleaning. "Who?" "All of them, but especially command. They don't like how people look at you now." She felt the truth of it in her chest. The commander's glances had sharpened, clipped with something that wasn't just discipline, it was caution. As if she were no longer just a soldier, but a variable, an unpredictable factor in a war built on control. She said nothing, only wiped the rifle's chamber with steady hands. Silence had always been her shield, but inside a storm gathered. The next mission stripped choice from them. A convoy intercepted, civilians once again at risk, enemy forces using the roads as bait. The orders came down quick. Secure the route, extract survivors, neutralize threats. The squad loaded up, the rumble of the transport vehicle masking the thrum of hearts beating too fast. She sat near the back, eyes scanning faces lit by flickering bulbs. Morales, jaw tight but steady. A private humming softly under his breath, a tune trembling with nerves. Another soldier clutching a folded photograph as if it might stop bullets. These were the faces she carried now. Flesh and blood, fragile and alive. And when she looked at them, she saw not weakness but the same fear she had once drowned in, and the strength it took to keep moving anyway. Her chest tightened. If command called her dangerous, maybe it was because she refused to let fear dictate when lives were left behind. The ambush came fast, just as she had predicted. A sudden explosion tore through the lead vehicle, shrapnel raining across the dirt road, the air choked with dust and screams. Gunfire followed, sharp cracks echoing off the hills. Chaos clawed at them, but she didn't flinch. She moved. Left flank, cover the civilians. Her voice cut through the storm, sharp, commanding, undeniable. The younger soldiers followed without hesitation, their movements raw but precise, drawn not by rank but by trust. Morales covered her blind side, firing bursts that drove attackers back behind rocks. Together, they carved order from panic. Civilians stumbled from wrecked vehicles, coughing, eyes wide with terror. She pushed forward, guiding them low, shielding with her own body when fire rained down too close. One girl tripped, knees bloodied, and without a thought she scooped her up, carrying her weight as bullets hissed past. Every choice was fire, every step was defiance, and still she carried. When the last shots faded, when the attackers fled into the hills leaving silence heavier than death, she stood at the center of the road, chest heaving, sweat and dust streaking her face. Around her, the civilians clung to one another alive. The soldiers regrouped, bruised but unbroken. And they looked at her, all of them, eyes wide, not with fear this time but with something else, a silent vow forming between them. Morales broke the quiet, voice rough. "You carried us through it." The words struck her like a blow, not praise, not worship, but recognition. And it was that, more than the gunfire, more than the blood, that left her shaken. Back at base, the whispers swelled louder. They spoke her name with weight, with stories already twisting into something larger than the truth. She had led when orders hadn't come. She had carried civilians through chaos. She had acted when hesitation would have killed. To the younger soldiers, she was proof that survival wasn't luck, it was will. To command, she was a fracture in the chain. The commander summoned her again, his office darker this time, blinds fully closed. He didn't sit. He stood, hands tight behind his back, jaw rigid. "You disobeyed again," he said flatly. Her eyes didn't waver. "I saved them." His voice sharpened. "You are not command, you don't give orders." Silence stretched. Her pulse hammered, but her face stayed calm. Finally she spoke, each word deliberate. "Orders don't mean anything to the dead." The commander's eyes narrowed. For a heartbeat she thought he might shout, might strip her down then and there. But instead his shoulders sagged with a weary exhale. "You think you're saving them," he murmured. "But what you're really doing is making them believe they can't survive without you. That is dangerous." She swallowed hard, the words cutting deeper than any reprimand, because part of her feared it was true. That night Morales found her sitting alone near the fence again, stars cold above. He sat without asking, silence stretching easy between them. "You heard what he said," she muttered, voice low. Morales nodded. "I did." "And you agree?" He was quiet for a long time. Then, "No, but I think you don't see it the way we do." She turned, brows furrowed. "You think you're just carrying us through fire. But the truth is, you're showing us how to walk through it ourselves." His words lingered, soft but unshakable, and for the first time in years she felt the edge of something she hadn't dared to touch: hope. In the days that followed, she noticed it more: how the younger soldiers moved differently, how they steadied faster under fire, how they spoke to civilians not with command but with humanity. They weren't just following her anymore. They were learning from her. And in that she saw something shift. The weight she carried wasn't just hers now, it was spreading, shared. But with that came danger, because command wasn't blind. She felt their eyes sharper on her in briefings, their silence heavier in halls. The word anomaly floated once, clipped and quiet, but enough to reach her ears. Still she carried on, because she knew the truth. Sometimes survival required defiance, and sometimes dignity wasn't in words or medals, It was in the act of carrying others through fire, no matter the cost. One evening, as the sun bled red over the hills, Morales asked the question she had been dreading. Why you? Why do you keep stepping into the fire when no one asks you to? Her throat closed, her chest ached, and at last she let the truth slip, quiet and raw. Because once I didn't move fast enough, and a boy died with his hand still in mine. Morales said nothing. He only placed a hand on her shoulder, steady, grounding. No judgment, no pity, just presence. And for the first time, she didn't feel alone in the fire. The field was quiet now. Too quiet. The kind of silence that comes after something has been broken so completely it can't make another sound. Smoke drifted across the horizon like tattered curtains, and the air was heavy with the bitter tang of ash and iron. She stood there, her rifle hanging loose at her side, the weight of it pressing into her bones as if it were the last reminder of who she had been. Why had she survived when so many hadn't? The thought pressed against her chest, unrelenting, as she looked at the empty stretch of earth where the convoy had burned. In that silence, she could still hear their voices, the laughter, the doubts, the fragments of lives that had clung to her in the moments before fire consumed them. Her name had never been written on the roster, just a mistake, they said, just an error in paperwork. She was invisible on paper, a shadow in the margins, forgotten. But when the fire rose and the world split open, it was her hands that pulled bodies from the wreckage, her voice that cut through the panic, her resolve that carried them forward. Now, with only ashes left, she wondered if anyone would ever truly know. She thought back to the boy from Ohio, the one who had given her the folded paper star to keep in her pocket. For luck, he'd said, even though his own voice had trembled when the helicopters took off that morning. She had teased him for believing in paper and hope, but she had kept it. Now its edges were singed, tucked in her vest, a memory she couldn't let go. Each step she took through the ruins felt like a confession. The dirt shifted under her boots, the silence pressing tighter until she found herself kneeling beside what was left of a helmet. She pressed her hand against it, eyes closing. Not a prayer, not really, just a pause, a way of saying, I remember, I was here. Because that's what they deserved, to be remembered. Not just numbers, not just names on stone, but people who had laughed and feared and carried quiet dreams. The world would write their stories differently. Official reports, clean lines, dates and figures, but she knew the truth. She had carried them through fire, and in those flames something inside her had burned too. And yet there was something else, a strange, quiet strength that had rooted itself in her chest. It was heavy, but it was steady. For all she had lost, for all the voices now silenced, she felt the weight of carrying them forward, not as ghosts, but as reminders. She remembered the medic's last words before the fire swallowed him. Not instructions, not fear, just, make it mean something. Her breath shook as the wind moved past her, carrying ash into the fading light. She looked out across the empty stretch of ground and whispered into the silence, it means something. I swear it does. The sun dipped lower, throwing long shadows across the wreckage. Somewhere in the distance, another unit would be moving in, their boots striking the earth without knowing who had already bled here. And maybe they would never know her name. Maybe the paperwork would remain blank, but it didn't matter. Not anymore. Because she knew. She rose slowly, her shoulders straight, rifle still at her side, but her eyes carrying something the reports could never capture. She turned toward the horizon where smoke met sky and began to walk. Not away, not back, just forward. The silence stretched, and with each step it grew less heavy. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it doesn't demand. It simply acts. And in that silence she was remembered forever.